Hello, name's Ryan, 24, senior year history major, Sacramento suburbs. If you passed me on the street, you probably wouldn't remember me. I'm the kind of guy who keeps things simple: classes during the day, part-time shifts at a used bookstore in the evenings, the occasional cheap beer with my best friend Aaron. That's about it. Aaron and I go way back, same major, same sarcastic humor, same tendency to procrastinate until absolutely everything's on fire. He's louder than I am, always the one pulling me into weekend plans I'd otherwise dodge. If it weren't for him, I'd probably live my entire life between the bookstore and my dorm. Most weekends I'd head over to his place, a clean two-story just 10 minutes from campus, tucked into one of those quiet neighborhoods with lots of trees and neatly trimmed lawns. We'd hang out, do a little studying, and end up watching basketball or rehashing old video games until late. It was our thing. The first time I met his mom, I remember being halfway through a sentence and forgetting what I was saying. She opened the front door. That's it. Nothing dramatic, just a door, a face, a moment that somehow reset something in me. She looked still. Not in a cold way. More like calm, like she didn't need to say much to be in control of whatever room she walked into. She had dark brown hair pulled loosely behind her tall frame, soft eyes that looked like they could read more than you were saying. Her voice was low and clear, with just a trace of curiosity. Her name was Marissa. 42, Aaron had said once. Worked as an admin manager at a medical center nearby, but the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was how she looked at me that first time, not flirtatiously, not motherly either, just directly, like I was a person worth paying attention to. "Ryan Wright?" she asked, resting one hand on the doorframe. I nodded, "Yes, ma'am." Her smile was subtle, the kind that doesn't need effort to linger. "Ma'am," she repeated, eyes narrowing in amusement. "You trying to age me or just being polite?" I stumbled over a response. She chuckled, stepped aside, and waved me in. Aaron was upstairs yelling at his Xbox. She called up to him without raising her voice, and he actually responded, something I hadn't seen happen with his dad on the phone once. I sat awkwardly at the kitchen island while she poured a glass of iced tea and slid it across the counter to me like we'd done this 100 times before. "Are you allergic to anything?" she asked. I blinked. No," she smirked. "Good. Because I made pasta, and I'm not in the mood to make something else." It wasn't what she said, it was the way she said it, dry humor, quiet confidence, the kind of tone that makes you want to keep talking just to hear more of it. I remember watching the way she moved through the kitchen unhurried, not like she was trying to impress anyone, just sure of herself. Every now and then she'd glance my way and hold eye contact just long enough for it to feel intentional. Aaron eventually came downstairs, still ranting about his game. We ate, played some co-op, lost badly, and laughed harder. The night ended like any other, me driving back to my place, windows cracked, music low. But my mind wasn't on the game. Or the food. It was on the way her smile didn't quite leave her eyes. From then on, every time I visited, there was something different. A new question from her. "You boys hungry? How'd that midterm go? You still working nights at that dusty bookstore?" She'd say it casually in passing, like she wasn't really asking, but it stuck. Once I said whatever's easiest when she asked about dinner. And she gave me this look, half amused, half something else. "Ryan," she said, turning from the fridge, "you're dangerously agreeable." That's how people end up being taken advantage of. I laughed it off. But something in the way she said it, like she actually meant it, stayed with me longer than it should have. Another time, she left a book on the coffee table next to where I always sat. Old City Blues, a noir-style graphic novel I'd once mentioned offhand during dinner. No one else touched it. When I returned it the next week, she didn't ask if I liked it. She just nodded, barely smiling, and said, "I figured you weren't just pretending to be well-read." It was small stuff, barely there moments. But I started to feel them stack up. I wasn't visiting for the games anymore, or the pizza, or even Aaron. It was the way she looked up when I walked in. The way she remembered what I'd said a week ago. The way her voice sounded quieter when we were the only ones in the room. I started watching the doorway more than the screen, waiting to hear her voice from the kitchen, noticing when her hair was tied back or left loose or tucked into the collar of her sweater. And I told myself none of it meant anything. But deep down, I already knew better. I brought the book back on a Friday afternoon, The Secret History, her copy. Hardback, creased spine, the kind of book that feels like it's been through a dozen late-night readings. I'd finished it in 3 sittings. Didn't even mean to, just couldn't stop. Aaron wasn't home. He'd texted earlier that he'd be out most of the day, picking up his brother from the airport, grabbing dinner on the way back. I told him I'd swing by anyway, drop off the book. That's all I meant to do. But when she opened the door, Marissa didn't look surprised to see me. She wore a loose button-up shirt, sleeves rolled gray joggers, and her hair tied into a messy low knot. No makeup, just her, natural, barefaced. And still somehow more striking than ever. You actually brought it back, she said, leaning lightly against the doorframe. I was starting to think you'd keep it hostage. I held up the book, didn't want to risk late fees. That pulled a laugh from her. Soft, warm, real. Come in, she said. I just made tea. I should have said no. I should have handed over the book and left. But I didn't. I stepped inside like I always did, shoes off, shoulders slightly tense. Only this time the house was quiet. No footsteps upstairs, no video game explosions from the living room, just the soft hum of a jazz playlist and the faint citrusy smell of something simmering on the stove. I won't keep you long, she said, walking ahead of me into the kitchen. But you read Tart in 3 days. That deserves at least a cup of Earl Grey. There were already 2 ceramic mugs on the counter, steam rising. It occurred to me then she'd expected me. Not just hoped, planned. She picked up the mugs and nodded toward the sliding glass door in the dining room. Let's sit outside, it's finally not freezing. The back patio was small but cozy, fenced in, lined with clay pots and ivy that clung lazily to the edges. A wooden table sat in the middle, paint weathered from years of sun. 2 chairs, one already pulled out. We sat. For a few minutes it was quiet, not awkward, just still, like the day had agreed to pause with us. She took a sip, set her cup down gently. Her fingers curled around the handle for a second longer than necessary. So she said, glancing at the book I'd set between us, did it live up to the hype? I nodded. Completely. It's the kind of story that makes you feel complicit even when you're just turning pages. Her eyes lit up a little. That's exactly the word. Complicit. She leaned back slightly, arms folding across her stomach. The sunlight caught in the soft lines at the corners of her eyes. Not age, just life. Lived in, not worn out. You know, she continued, I used to lend books to Aaron's friends all the time. Most never gave them back, or pretended they read them. I smiled. So I'm already ahead of the curve. You're not like most of them, she said almost absent-mindedly. Then catching herself, she added, I mean, you actually think about what you read. That's rare. There was a beat of silence. Her gaze lingered. I met it. For a moment too long. She looked away first. We kept talking about book school, how she got into admin work even though she originally studied fine arts. She told me about her old oil paintings, how she hadn't picked up a brush in years. Her voice lowered when she mentioned it, like part of her still missed it. I listened more than I spoke, watching the way her eyes moved when she thought, how her thumb circled the rim of her mug when she paused to search for a word. Nothing rehearsed, no filter, just her in real time. Eventually she asked, do your parents read? My mom used to, I said. Before the divorce, she'd always have something by her bed. Now I think she just listens to audiobooks while she cleans. And your dad? I shook my head. Not unless it's a fishing magazine. She gave a faint smile. Figures. The air between us had thickened, not in a heavy way, but in the kind of way where every movement starts to feel meaningful. Intentional. Even the way she set her mug down made a sound I remembered. She shifted in her seat, turning slightly toward me. Not fully, just enough. Ryan, she said quietly, do you ever feel something and wonder if it's out of place? I looked at her. Her expression wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't playful. It was open, honest, like she wasn't just asking for herself. I answered without thinking, only when I'm not sure the other person feels it too. We didn't say anything after that. Not for a long time. The wind picked up. A bird landed on the fence. Somewhere inside the tea kettle clicked off, long forgotten. She didn't move. Neither did I, and in that stillness something shifted. Unspoken. Real. Not rushed. Not named. But known. After that day on the patio, something shifted. Nothing was said. No lines were drawn. No agreements made. But the way I showed up started to feel different. And the way she greeted me, that changed too. I still came by on weekends, still under the familiar excuse of studying with Aaron, even though we both knew those sessions rarely lasted more than 20 minutes. We'd fall back into game controllers and sports debates within the hour. Nothing out of the ordinary, except it wasn't ordinary anymore. Because now, when I walked through the door, my eyes immediately scanned for her. Sometimes she'd be in the kitchen, back turned, humming along to whatever vinyl was spinning on the old Crossley near the counter. Other times she'd step out of the hallway just as I arrived, towel slung over her shoulder from doing laundry, hair pulled up in that same low, messy knot that felt more intimate than anything else she could have worn. And she'd look at me not long, not obviously just enough for it to mean something. Once I reached past her to grab a water glass and brushed her hand by accident. She didn't move away, didn't flinch. She just glanced at me sideways and said, "You always move that quietly." I smiled. "You always keep your defenses that low." Her lips curved slow and subtle, only around certain company. Another time she'd left a tin on the counter. Inside were 3 types of cookies, homemade, crisp edges, still soft in the middle. No note, just a yellow post-it stuck on the lid. Erin thinks I only make salad. Let's keep it that way. I didn't mention it, but I left the empty tin behind on purpose. Little things kept stacking up. A folded blanket draped over the armrest where I usually sat. A paperback mystery on the table cover angled toward me like it was waiting. She'd ask if I wanted tea, and by the time I said yes, it was already steeping. Erin never noticed. Or maybe he did, in the way people notice patterns, but don't have the right lens to name them. He'd leave the room for 10 minutes and return without question. Sometimes we'd all sit around the table and she'd make eye contact with me mid-sentence. Just for a second. Just long enough. The moments didn't have names, but they had weight. One Thursday afternoon, I stopped by to return a charger I'd borrowed. Erin was out some group project at the library, running late as always. I figured I'd drop it and leave. But when I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. Like she'd been close. Like she'd been listening for it. Marissa stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, phone in hand, hair loose down her shoulders. No shoes, no earrings, just her. Effortless. I was about to text you, she said. Thought you might have forgotten. I held up the charger, never doubted me right. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Honestly, I didn't think you came just for that. There was a pause, small loaded. She stepped aside. I walked in. The house smelled like cinnamon and something roasting slow in the oven. The kind of scent that makes you forget where you were going or why you were in a rush in the first place. We talked for a while. About nothing. About books. About how Erin still can't fold laundry to save his life. She laughed when I told her he thought almond milk was made from squeezing almonds. She poured tea. The sun was beginning to set, slanting sideways through the kitchen blinds, casting soft gold stripes across the countertops. We stood there, mugs in hand, not quite touching, not quite apart. Then she said it. Soft, casual. Like she was mentioning a grocery item. Next time you don't need to knock. I looked at her. She kept her gaze on her cup. I don't lock it most afternoons. Just come in. That night I went home with a head full of static. I told myself I wouldn't take it seriously. That it was just kindness, just comfort, just her being her. But the next time I came over, I didn't knock. It was a Saturday early evening. Erin had gone camping with friends, wouldn't be back until Sunday. I knew that. She knew I knew that. Still, when I opened the door, I hesitated on the threshold like I was somewhere I didn't yet deserve to be. But then I stepped inside. She was in the kitchen, back turned, stirring something in a pot. A soft jazz record was playing, Miles maybe, something low and smoky. She looked over her shoulder when she heard me, didn't seem startled at all. "Hey," she said, turning with the kind of smile that wasn't surprised, just pleased. "Hey," I said back, closing the door behind me. Dinner was already half prepared. Chicken, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine on the counter uncorked. She handed me a bowl without asking and nodded toward the table. We ate, talked a little, not much. Most of the conversation lived in between things, and the glances, in the way her foot brushed mine under the table, in the silence that never pressed. We didn't touch, not really, but the space between us felt like it had its own gravity. After dinner I helped with the dishes. She handed me a towel. Our fingers touched, just slightly. Neither of us pulled away. When it was time to leave, I stood near the door keys in hand. She walked over, arms folded lightly across her chest. She leaned against the frame, looking at me the way someone does when they already know what you're thinking. No goodbyes, no lingering words, just a look. And in it, everything unspoken was finally loud enough to hear. The visits became routine, not scheduled, not discussed, just understood. A couple of nights a week I'd show up, sometimes with a book, sometimes with nothing. And the door was always unlocked, just like she said it would be. Erin was around less and less. Group projects, weekends away, long shifts at the student rec center. Whether he noticed or not, he never said anything. Or maybe he chose not to see what he didn't want to confront. But I started timing my arrivals. I never came too late. Never stayed too long. Always left before anything could be called something it wasn't. And yet the space between Marissa and me was no longer undefined. It wasn't official. It wasn't public, but it was there. We shared dinners that didn't feel casual anymore. We sat on opposite sides of the couch with our legs angled just enough that our knees brushed and stayed there. She'd pour 2 glasses of wine without asking. I'd carry the plates to the sink without being told. We didn't talk about what it was. There were no confessions, no dramatic pauses, just evenings thick with unspoken understanding, long looks, brief touches that stayed a moment too long. She started saying things that made my pulse jump. Once, after I told her a story about helping Aaron through a breakup, she leaned her head slightly, her gaze steady. "You're not just Aaron's friend Ryan," she said, voice soft but pointed. "Not to me." Another night, while I was putting a book back on the shelf, she spoke from the kitchen. "You know, sometimes I forget how young you are." I looked over at her. She wasn't smiling, just watching me studying. I said nothing, because I didn't want to break the moment, because I didn't want to be reminded of the age gap or what this could look like from the outside. But I also didn't want to lose whatever this had become. And maybe that's what started to scare me. Not the risk, not the line we kept towing, but how much it would hurt if it ended. That kind of quiet ache settled in during the stillest moments, like when we sat side by side reading in near silence, and I'd catch her looking at me over the top of her book. Or when she'd walk past me in the hallway and let her fingers trail along my arm like it was second nature. Every gesture carried weight now. The warmth of her hand when she passed me a mug. The pause before she closed the dishwasher and stood still facing me, waiting for something neither of us named. I knew what we were doing. So did she. But no one said it out loud. Aaron would text me randomly. "You and my mom get along almost too well, LOL." I'd reply with some deflection. "She feeds me, man. I am not going to complain." He never pushed, never asked more. But part of me wondered if he knew or if he simply didn't want to know. The anxiety crept in at night when I left her house and sat in my car engine offhand on the wheel, trying to figure out if I was being careful or just selfish. I started staying a little less long, leaving a little earlier, answering her questions with shorter replies, not out of guilt, but because I could feel how much I wanted more. And I didn't know what more would cost. One night I showed up after class. She already had leftovers warming in the oven. We ate on the back patio, just the two of us. The sky above was dimming and the wind played softly with the leaves along the fence. She looked tired, not worn, just quietly spent. "I had a rough day," she admitted. "Too many people talking, not enough of them saying anything worth hearing." I poured her another glass of wine. She sipped slowly, then looked at me over the rim. "You don't talk like them," she said. "You don't pretend." I stared at my plate. I try not to. She reached out then, just her fingers resting lightly on my wrist. Nothing more. "You know," she murmured, "sometimes I see you more clearly than I see people my own age." The words hit softly, but they landed deep. I didn't know what to say. Not then. Not with the night closing in around us and her touch still lingering on my skin like a quiet echo. Later, as I stood by the door getting ready to leave, I finally asked it. The question that had been building in me for weeks. "Do you think we should stop this?" I said quietly. "Whatever. This is..." She didn't answer. She didn't look away either. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, gently, calmly. Her thumb brushed over the back of mine, slow, steady. She didn't say no, but she didn't say yes. And somehow that silence felt louder than anything else could have. The first night I stayed over wasn't planned. It was late, a quiet, overcast Friday. I'd come by after class just to drop off a book she'd lent me. Aaron was out of town again, some weekend trip with his cousins up north. I told myself I'd leave after a cup of tea. I didn't. We ate leftovers, sat on the couch, talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did. She wore a cardigan that fell past her knees and tucked her legs beneath her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Somewhere between stories, the space between us vanished. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden kiss. No breathless declarations. Just a shift. A quiet understanding that had been circling for weeks, finally finding its home. I touched her cheek. She looked at me fully, calmly, and didn't move away. Later, when the house was dark and she curled into the crook of my arm beneath the comforter, she whispered, "You didn't ask if you could stay." "I didn't think I had to," I said. She didn't answer. She just reached for my hand beneath the blanket and laced her fingers through mine like it was always supposed to be that way. After that, we didn't pretend anymore, not with each other. There was no need to clarify. We knew what it was. Not defined, not labeled, but real in all the ways that mattered. We kept the routine simple. I'd come by after class, help her carry in groceries, watch old movies on the worn-out couch, cook together, sometimes with music playing low in the background, sometimes in silence. And when the lights were off and the house was still, we existed in a space that belonged only to us. Aaron started noticing. Nothing direct, no accusations. But he'd glance longer, ask smaller questions. "You've been around more lately," he said once. I shrugged, "Just keeping you on track." He laughed, but his eyes lingered on mine a second too long. Then came the next one. "You and my mom, you guys get along weirdly well, huh?" I froze for half a second, then forced a grin. "She makes decent lasagna, hard not to like that." He didn't push, but the silence he left behind felt heavier than before. Marissa felt it too. We kept things careful, no texts, no calls. When Aaron was home, I acted like nothing had changed, and she matched me effortlessly. A glance here, a brush of her fingers there. That was all we allowed. Still others started sensing something. One afternoon, her neighbor waved at me from across the driveway, eyebrows raised slightly higher than casual. A coworker of hers, someone I passed in the kitchen, once gave a slow look between us and said nothing. No one ever said it out loud, but people see more than we think they do. One evening, I was sitting at her kitchen counter watching her slice apples with the same small knife she always used, the one with the chipped blue handle. I asked the question I'd been carrying around quietly for weeks. If Aaron ever asks, I said, voice low, I'm not sure I'll lie. She didn't stop slicing, but her hand slowed. I don't want to hide, I added, but I don't want to lose him either. She nodded, eyes still on the cutting board. Then she looked up at me, and in her gaze there was no panic, just something steady, grounded. This isn't wrong, she said softly. It's just different. Her words landed like a hand on the shoulder, gentle, assuring, unshakably honest. We didn't talk more after that. We didn't need to. That night when we curled up under the covers, neither of us said a word about the future. We just breathed, felt held on to what we had quietly and without fear. I don't know how long this will last. I don't know what Aaron will say or how people will react if the truth ever makes its way to the surface. But I know this: what's between us wasn't a mistake. It wasn't lust. It wasn't a lonely impulse or a passing thrill. It was built in silence. In books passed hand to hand, in quiet dinners and warm tea, and a glance across a room no one else noticed. And it's real. Maybe we'll break apart. Maybe we won't. But when I look at her, really look at her, I don't feel guilt. I feel seen. And that's more than most people ever get. So no, I don't regret this. Not for a second.